rock and roll. Alrighty, I'm Paige, I'm an alcoholic, and welcome everyone. And so today we're kicking off, we're in the chapter more about alcoholism. And we're going to be starting on page 35. And what we're going to focus on as we go through page 35 and as we go through the chapter more about alcoholism, what we're looking for is examples of the mental obsession. The chapter more about alcoholism is really a chapter to hammer home and to smash the idea of my hopelessness as an alcoholic, which if you're here today and you're like, girl, I don't want nothing to be smashed. Welcome, I'm glad you're here. Me neither. But we got to smash the delusion that I can do it on my own. I've got to smash the delusion, that I might be like a non-alcoholic if I'm an alcoholic, right? So where we're picking up, page 35, first full paragraph. And this is our friend, his name's Jim. We're going to talk about Jim. And his real name, if you're one of those people who are like, no, but who's Jim really? Who's Jim really? His real name is Ralph Furlong. And that's who he was in actuality. So I'm going to just bring this up for a second. And just so that I have it ready to go. Alrighty, so it says, our first example is a friend we shall call Jim. Lovely guy. And it says he inherited a lucrative automobile agency. So what that means is either through marriage or through, his family, he became the owner of a car dealership. And when it says lucrative, what that means is that car dealership was making money. So he is the boss of a car dealership that is making money. That's the takeaway. And some of you are like, if you're like me, you're like, oh, financially, I don't relate to that at all. But that's where Jim is at. So it goes on to say, this man has a charming wife and family. Sorry, I skipped over that. Charming wife and family. So he's got, keep in mind, we're trying to dispel some of these myths about what alcoholism is. He's got a good family. He's got a good spouse. And yet we're going to see he's alcoholic. He inherited a lucrative automobile agency. So he owns a car dealership and he's running it. And what we're going to see is our family doesn't necessarily make us alcoholic. Some of the material success we have doesn't prevent us from having alcoholism. It says he had a commendable World War record. So in the First World War, he served well and valiantly. So what we're seeing is that this is a good guy. And it says he is a good salesman. Everybody likes him. What's not to like? Jim, he's a good guy, right? He is an intelligent man, normal so far as we can see, except for a nervous disposition. Now, when it speaks of that nervous disposition, and welcome everyone who just joined, we're on page 35. When we speak about that nervous disposition, what we could possibly be talking about there, I'm just going to share the screen, is the spiritual malady. That nervous disposition is often in reference to that spiritual malady. And keep in mind, if you're somebody that's a little like me, it's like, oh, Paige, she had a bit of a nervous disposition. But what was happening on the inside was that I was having anxiety where it's like my insides were screaming. You know what I mean? She seems a little nervous. Now, it's important to understand we do not diagnose alcoholism based on the spiritual malady because there are non-alcoholics who are spiritually sick. There are non-alcoholics who are nervous and anxious and restless, irritable, and discontent. But that is what we're going to treat. So we can't use the spiritual malady simply to diagnose alcoholism, but that is what we treat in Alcoholics Anonymous. And how we treat the spiritual malady is we take the 12 steps to produce a spiritual awakening. And so if we're writing in our book, no pressure, but I do hear it's what all the cool kids are doing, you can make a little note that is the spiritual malady. And something that can be helpful to describe the spiritual malady is that the spiritual malady is a conscious sense of separateness from God. So it is a sense of separateness from my Creator. Because what am I after? I'm after conscious contact. Do you know what I'm saying? You see, when I have this sense of separation, and I don't know that's what it is. I think I just got life problems. I'm sure you guys relate. It's like my spouse is not doing, they're not espousing correctly. I know that's not how that word works. But, I think I got work problems. I think life isn't treating me fair. But the truth of the matter is, it is a sense in the depth of my being of separateness from God. I don't know that when I get here. So, intelligent man, normal so far as we can see, except for a nervous disposition. He did no drinking until he was 35. That's one of the worst things about getting sober young, is you'll see 35 up on the horizon, and then you'll catch it in the rearview mirror, because it's got all these references to 30 and your 30s, and it's like, oh, there it was. There it was. All right. And so he did no drinking until he was 35. In a few years, he became so violent, when intoxicated, he had to be committed. And I'm gonna pop the cycle up on the little Zoom screen again, and I want to point something out. I'll put me up there too. Hi. I want to point out, if you're writing in your book, you can make a little note that is the physical allergy. Because somebody who is able to control the amount once they start to drink is going to stop drinking before they are committed to an asylum. You know what I mean? There are people that will have a glass of rosé at the end of the night and then go to bed. And those are people who do not have the physical allergy, because they are able to control the amount they drink every single time they drink. But if I know what it's like to take a drink and have that drink set off that thing inside of me that screams more, and the more that I drink, the louder that more gets. If I know what that feeling is like, and I know what it is like to drink myself into a situation where I know what it's like to drink myself into violent behavior, where I would act in ways when drinking that I would never act when sober. But do we also know what it's like to drink ourselves into an institution? Drinking ourselves into a psych ward, a jail cell, a drunk tank, an emergency room. Have I ever started drinking and found myself there? Because I want you to know that is a sign of the physical allergy. Because a non-alcoholic is stopping before institutionalization. They just put the brakes on that. Whereas me, red means go. Non-alcoholics, they're like, ooh, I'm starting to feel it. I should stop. I start to feel it. I'm like, more please, right now, let's go. That's how my little physical allergy works. All right, so on leaving the asylum, he came into contact with us. So him leaving the asylum is a lot of like his swearing off, right? Because he doesn't want to go back to the hospital. And so let's see what happens. And I will stop the share. It says, we told him what we knew of alcoholism. And what they knew of alcoholism, what they were explaining, was the physical allergy and the mental obsession. They were focusing on that. And so they were out. So you can write a note, the mental obsession, physical allergy, and we can also write our problem. So they were outlining our problem, or outlining step 1. Look at that. 3 ways to look at it. So if you're writing in your book, I apologize profusely because I didn't say write small. If you were like mental obsession really big, and then there's no room for all of that. But I just wanted to point out that's what they're doing. So they're laying down that step 1, which is to say laying down what our problem is, which is the physical allergy and the mental obsession. And then when it says, and the answer we had found, what they are explaining the solution is the spiritual awakening. And that is our solution. So you can write spiritual awakening. I know, I'm like, where? Write small if you're able. Or don't write. You do what you want. Don't listen to me. I'm just a silly drunk. But you can make a note of the spiritual awakening. You can make a note that is our solution. And when they are explaining what our solution is, what they are doing is laying down the idea of step 2. So we're seeing them lay down step 1. We're seeing them lay down step 2. Because step 2 is all about simply believing that a solution could exist, that a spiritual awakening is possible. I don't need to understand the solution. I don't need to like the solution. I don't have the solution yet. But I just need to believe that the solution could be possible for someone like me. Does that make sense? And if we get some head shakes, I'm like, oh, uh-oh. But we got some nods and some blank stares, which is fine. Glad you're here. I love you. Alrighty. So it says, he made a beginning. And I will tell you what he made a beginning means in contemporary, which is to say modern Alcoholics Anonymous. He made a beginning means I started on my 4th step, and then I'm really working on my 4th step. No. I'm really working on it. You know, when we're sitting on it, we're not working on it, but we're going to tell people I'm really working on my 4th step. And then we kind of go to meetings and we share about that. Then after a while of us, I know you guys don't relate to this at all. After a while of sitting on our 4th step, we don't say, like, I'm working on it now. We say, I really need to get back on it. Do you know what I mean? That's what that means. He wrote a little bit on his 4th step and he's done nothing. And so he made a beginning is to make a start. Now, I will point out there are a number of ways we can look at making a beginning. There is that as making a beginning, but really making a beginning is doing some of these 12 steps, but not doing all of them. So it can be doing a 4th step, actually doing it, not just talking about how we're really working on it, and then reading the soup labels. Because I promise you, you want to do spring cleaning, start a 4th step, because you're going to find all the other things you want to do instead of put pen to paper on that. I'm like, oh, the eaves troughs. No, deal with your spiritual eaves troughs. We got to clean those first. Then we can do with the literal ones. But it also means doing a 4th step, doing a 5th step, and not continuing on. It means making some of, but not all of our amends. It means not continuing on with our daily prayer, meditation, inventory, our evening review, our 10th step, not carrying this message to others, doing some of the deal, but not all of the deal, and we will drink again. Because when I understand step 1 for what it really means is that if I have alcoholism, I will drink again. That is what step 1 means. Whether I think so or not, whether I like it or not, if I have alcoholism, it is inevitable. I will drink again. Absolutely. Yeah. Why do we, and I hear you when it's like, so there's a thing in the chat. The battle I'm fighting in my state after my relapse isn't doubt that the solution exists. I know 100% that this works. It worked to move me out of a hopeless alcoholic state. My depression, though, tells me, why do I want a solution at all? And if you're here today and you're feeling like that, what I want you to know is that is so many of our experiences. You see, if I'm able to do this work and I'm doing this work, and I have a spiritual awakening, and what's on offer is powerful. It is powerful, the awakening and the solution that is on offer. But as soon as I stop doing it, there is an erosion. And it is the most incredible thing that happens. Because people like us will take the actions of the 12 steps and have a powerful awakening that changes who we are. And then we stop doing the work because life gets busy, because we get complacent, because it's like, I'm good now, I'm fixed, I'm cured, all those reasons. And then we start falling into a difficult state. We start falling into the world where the world begins to get gray, where that hopelessness begins to settle in again, where that anxiety starts to rise in our chest up to our neck, where we're feeling it in our shoulder blades. That depression gets on us and it gets hard to face life and show up to life. And, man, those problems start piling up. I got problems. They're piling up and up and up. And even though we were doing the work and the work worked. Like, it works. And even though in this moment we are not doing the work, and we are struggling, and we are miserable, and we are hurting, there's a thing in our brains, and it happens to all of us, where our brains say, oh, I couldn't help. No, Paige, you don't understand. I don't need to write a 4-step. No. That couldn't, pen to paper on some inventory? No. A new sponsee? No, Paige, you don't understand. There is something about, like, once I get into that place of complacency, where it becomes easy for complacency to build momentum. And for those that know me, know I am big on momentum. I'm big on that. I'm annoying about that. And so what do? What I have to do is I need to build consistency, especially when I've got that hopelessness on me, that depression on me, and I don't see a solution in front of me. What I need to do, and sometimes it's just baby steps, but taken, like, and I'm big on dive in, dive in, sit down, get her done, but I got to do it consistently. Like when somebody's off the beam with prayer and meditation, I'm always like, start small and build momentum. If I haven't prayed for a long time and I'm struggling with prayer, just one quick prayer. One quick prayer a day. Those of you who know my suggestion about meditation is, if I haven't meditated or I don't think I can meditate, I start with 2 minutes a day, maybe between 1 and 3, 2 minutes a day. But I do it daily, and very quickly it builds momentum. And that's the thing, is at first, when I'm trying to get myself out of that hopeless state, whether it's off a relapse, I mean, if I'm coming off a relapse, I got to dive in. There is a sense of urgency. Those of you who know, I also talk a lot about that window of willingness, that thing that happens when I burn my life to the ground and I'm in a place of pain. And what happens is a little window opens up and I'm willing to take action that I wasn't willing to take before. And when that opens up, even if it's not open up all the way, but I'm just willing enough to do something I don't want to do, I do it. I dive in, I go and I do it. And if I continue to take that action, I will get well. Do you know what I mean? That momentum can carry me through. But if I don't take those actions, man, if I am stuck in the mud, I'm stuck. But sometimes I need that push, and that push can be diving in. And sometimes I need to build that momentum, and that momentum is building it with consistency. And here's the thing, if you are in that place of a depression or a depressive state, and you're like, I don't know if I can start. Stick around after the meeting. What I will do is I will connect you with somebody who will sit with you and help you take the course of action and will drag you through it with your consent. Because the 12 steps are consensual. But with your consent, yeah, they're consent. You gotta say, okay, I'll do it. If you're like, no, I don't want to do it. Nobody's going to make you. I mean, that's alcoholism's job. The pain and suffering of alcoholism will make you do it, but I'm not going to make you. But we will have people that will sit with you and take you through this course of action on a daily basis to allow this miracle and change to happen for you. So our homeboy Jim, he did some of the work and then stopped. And then it says, so his family was reassembled and he began to work as a salesman for the business he lost through drinking. So I just want to point something out. It was the company that he was the boss of, and he was running the whole show. And now he's working for that same company as a salesman. I'm not that humble. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, there's no way you're not showing up to work. Like, oh, let me tell you how you're doing it wrong, even though I'm the one that lost the company. But like, there's no way I don't got some resentments and I'm not fueled by the bondage of self. You know what I'm saying? And so it says, all went well for a time, but he failed to enlarge his spiritual life. Now that is an important line, because when somebody relapses, it's never what happened. It is what failed to happen. Because for an alcoholic to relapse is the inevitable consequence of alcoholism. To understand step one is to understand that I will drink again. If I do not have a spiritual awakening, I'm going to drink again. So Why did he relapse? Because he was doomed to drink again. Now, after I come to Alcoholics Anonymous, there's a second reason for relapse, and it is a failure to grow spiritually. I failed to do the work to allow the spiritual awakening to happen, which really, the 12 steps, that's what they're there for. And then I stopped doing the work, which is to say I stopped doing 10, 11, and 12. Does that make sense? And it really is, I know it's annoying, it really is that simple. It's not what was going around out here. It was my failure to grow spiritually. It's what's going on in here. Me not growing spiritually. And so, it says, to his consternation, he found himself drunk half a dozen times in rapid succession. And so I'm just going to put the cycle back on the Zoom screen for a second. So what would happen is half a dozen times, I want to point out that is 6. So he would come to, and he swore off, and he did some of the work, but not all of it. And then what kicked in for him was the inevitable mental obsession, the thought that took him back to the first drink. And he went around this cycle, never again, and drinking again, and never again, drinking again, never again, drinking again, 6 times quickly. Have I ever had that experience? Have I ever said, I do not want to do it again? Have I ever come to AA, meaning I do not want to do it again, only to find myself doing it again? What that means is I have alcoholism. And the good news for that is we have a solution. So 6 times very quickly. It goes on to say, on each of these occasions, we worked with him, reviewing carefully what had happened. Which, those are some delightful AAs. You know, they weren't giving up on him. Because I think they knew. They knew the nature of his alcoholism. You know, if a sponsee relapses, it's because it was inevitable. Do you know what I'm saying? That's why they relapsed, is because they were going to relapse. Unless we have a spiritual awakening, which kind of tells me that I got to get moving, and I got to get moving quickly. But these are good 12-step members. They're showing up. And as long as he's willing, they're willing. So he agreed he was a real alcoholic and in serious condition. So he can see the reality of his step 1 experience. It says he knew he faced another trip to the asylum if he kept on. So he knew that for him, if he was to drink again, he was going to end up back in the hospital, back in the asylum. Now, in the 1930s, asylums were not pleasant places to be. Also, just if you're wondering, if you hear some background noise, my dog has showed up, and he's got his head right on my big book, and he's wanting some attention. So that is the balancing act that I've got going on. So I'm trying to pet the dog and do the big book study, all at the same time. And some of you are like, you're not doing both of those well. That's debatable. He's enjoying the scritches. Alrighty. So he knew he would face another trip to the asylum if he kept on. Moreover, he would lose his family for whom he had a deep affection. There are so many times we come to AA or we come to rehab and we know that if we drink again, we'll lose the things that are most important to us. Have I ever had that experience where I knew I could not drink again only to drink again? That is the power of this illness. Top of page 36, it says, yet he got drunk again. We asked him to tell us exactly how it happened. This is his story. So this is from Jim, Ralph's point of view. He says, I came to work on Tuesday morning, and I always want to have a pause and be like, I wonder what happened to Monday. You know, just wonder what happened to that. And it says, I remember I felt irritated that I had to be a salesman for a concern I once owned. I'll tell you, I'd be pretty irritated too, that I had to be a salesperson for a company I used to work with, or I used to own, and like I was the employer, and now I'm an employee. I would not be chill about that, you know? And it goes to say, like, what we're going to see is as we go through this week, we're going to see we're going to see Jim. And next week, maybe next week. We'll see. Like maybe next week as in we'll be here, but it's just whether or not we'll continue the reading or not. But in a couple weeks at least, we'll see Fred. And with Jim, what we see is we see resentments building up. We see stuff going on inside of his spiritual condition, right? Stuff that needed to be cleaned with inventory, stuff that needed to be cleaned with amends, and that he's not doing the cleaning. But with Fred, what we're going to see is we're not going to see evidence of the spiritual malady. It's going to be a perfect day, not a cloud on the horizon. And that is the power of alcoholism. So Tuesday morning, salesman for a concern I once owned. I had a few words with the boss, but nothing serious. Anyone here ever have a few words with the boss? Is it ever nothing serious? And if you're like me, there's somebody in a position of authority, I get the in my stomach. You know, it's like being taken to the principal's office. It's like, oh no, you know, that's what I'm like. I mean, Jim was probably like, don't tell me what to do. I used to run this whole thing. But I'm a little more like, oh no, I don't want to be in trouble. So like, yeah, do we relate to either of that? And it says, then I decided to drive into the country and see one of my prospects for a car. And I want to point something out because I always thought that was just interesting. I'm like, why is he driving out to sell a car? Well, keep in mind in the 1930s, this was a more common practice because there wasn't public transportation, especially in the country, and not everybody had a car, so he would have to go take the car to sell it. So I want to point something out. Yeah, the boss was probably like a few words. Where were you on Monday? Do you know what I mean? Yeah. And so it says, so he's going to, then I decided to drive into the country and see one of my prospects for a car. So he's going to try and sell a car. So I want to point something out. He's got good motives. There's nothing wrong with what he's doing. I mean, maybe he needed to do a 10 step. We'll just throw that out. One of the common things when I'm working with sponsees, and I'm big on like, let's call a spade, which is to say a resentment is a resentment. And there's a thing that'll happen, and I'm sure none of you guys have ever done this, where you pull out the thesaurus to avoid having to do inventory. No, Paige, it's not a resentment. I'm just a little frustrated. No, Paige, I'm not resentful. I'm just a bit irritated. I know I had a few words with the boss, but it was nothing serious. Do you know what I mean? Like trying to find out all the way. And so I'm big on let's call a spade. Or I took the resentment inventory and I just crossed out resentment and wrote just a little frustrated. So it's like, oh no, you're just a little frustrated. Delightful. We've got inventory for that. I am a jerk. So he's got no intent. So he's good motives. He's going to do some work. Then I decided to drive out to the country and see one of my prospects for a car. On the way, I felt hungry, so I stopped at a roadside place where they have a bar. I had no intention of drinking. And I want to point that out because so often do I end up in a situation where I've got no intention of drinking. No intention. But my desire to stay sober has no effect on my ability to stay sober. My need to stay sober has no effect on my ability to stay sober. And I will point something out. Him stopping at a roadside place where they have a bar, there's nothing crazy about that. This is the 1930s in the country. There's not a McDonald's. He can't have it your way and get a Whopper. Burger King? I think that's their slogan. Wendy's. Wendy's, the ginger. You know what I mean? So that he can't do a drive-through. So there's nothing crazy about that. And he has no intention of drinking. I just thought I would get a sandwich. Fair enough. I also had the notion I might find a customer for a car at this place, which was familiar for I'd been going to it for years. And that makes sense because, you know, in the 1930s, he couldn't do a viral Instagram reel that would get all the people talking. He had to actually physically go and talk to people, which for those introverts sounds like an absolute nightmare. But he's a salesman, so he's like good motives. It makes sense. There's nothing crazy about this. And it says, and it was, which was familiar, for I had been going to it for years. So it's not like a sneaky out of the way, oh, let me go to this place where they have a bar. In fact, he says, I had eaten there many times during the months I was sober. So he has been here before sober. And it says, I sat down at a table and ordered a sandwich and a glass of milk, which is a completely reasonable thing to do. Then it says, still no thought of drinking. He has no thought of drinking, no intention to drink, no desire to drink. He has all those consequences looming. He's going to lose his job, lose his family, lose his dignity, his respect and his freedom, because he's going to end up back in the asylum. No intention, no thought of drinking. I ordered another sandwich and decided to have another glass of milk. Which the only time that's ever like pegged anyone's interest is if I've been working with somebody and they were in Overeaters Anonymous. They're like a little like, oh, you know. But for just us alcoholics, it's like, that's not crazy. He's a hungry guy. And then it says suddenly, and let's make a note of suddenly. Because I want to emphasize, I have no effective mental defense against suddenly. I cannot play the tape against suddenly. I cannot think of the consequence against suddenly. I cannot do a pro and cons list against suddenly. I cannot call my sponsor against suddenly. I cannot go to a meeting against suddenly. Suddenly, I have no defense against suddenly. When suddenly comes, not if, but when suddenly comes, I will drink again. And you can make a note, this is the mental obsession. Suddenly, the thought crossed my mind. That is the mental obsession. The thought crosses his mind before the drink crosses his lips. The thought precedes the drink. And that is what my problem is as an alcoholic. I'll have all the consequences lined up. I'll have all the threats looming. I will know beyond a shadow of a doubt I can never safely drink again. And yet a time and place will come where a thought will come to mind and I will drink again. And when I can see that that is my experience, that hopelessness leads me to grab a hold of the hope that is on offer. Absolutely. Absolutely. And if you're like, that's the thing. Yeah, 2 years and totally free of the obsession. And then it'll come back. If I don't continue to do this work, it will come back. It will come back. And I will drink again. And see, now, if I burn it to the ground, I might be in a lot of pain. I might be in a lot of suffering. Do you guys know what I'm saying? Like, I might have that, like, man, Paige, you don't understand. I'm never going to do it again. But how quickly I forget that pain. How quickly I forget that pain. He forgot that pain. He forgot that suffering. So suddenly the thought crossed my mind that if I were to put an ounce of whiskey into my milk, it couldn't hurt me on a full stomach. That was it. Just put some whiskey in his milk. And I will say, the first time I read that, I'm like, ew, gross. I bet it like curdled. Like, that's disgusting. But then I forgot like Kahlua and White Russians were a thing, right? Like, so that was one of those. Alrighty, so I just gotta bring up something for later. Boom, boom. Alrighty, so it couldn't hurt me on a full stomach. I ordered a whiskey and poured it into the milk. I vaguely sensed I was not being any too smart. And how many times before I took a drink, I had a vague sense, a gnawing feeling in my gut, ooh, this is probably not a good idea. And then I immediately brushed it away with the thought that, well, felt reassured as I was taking the whiskey on a full stomach, right? It won't hurt me. Here's how, right? The experiment, so that is the mental obsession. And when it says the experiment went so well, I ordered another whiskey and poured it into more milk. I wonder what that was. That sounds like the ease and comfort, and what we're seeing is the physical allergy starting to kick off. Boy, that experiment went so well. I'm just scientifically minded. Let me do it again. Now that's the allergy. That didn't seem to bother me any, so I tried another. Thus started one more journey to the asylum for Jim. And so he went on his spree and ended up in the asylum. So here was the threat of commitment, the loss of family and position, to say nothing of that intense mental and physical suffering which drinking always caused him. Right? He had that mental and physical suffering. He had the pain. It always hurt him. But yet he could not bring to mind that pain and that suffering. It said he had much knowledge about himself as an alcoholic. Keep in mind, the AAs had shown up and they had carried this message. And they were explaining to him about that physical allergy. And they were explaining about the mental obsession. They didn't have the Zoom screen, but they could have even drawn the cycle out for him. And knowledge does not keep me sober. That is important to understand. I cannot stay sober on pain. I cannot stay sober on consequences. I cannot stay sober on fear. I cannot stay sober on knowledge. Heck, I can't even stay sober on desire. The only thing, if I am an alcoholic, that will keep me sober is a spiritual awakening. That I then gotta keep it going. You know what I mean? I gotta keep it rocking and rolling. So it said he had much knowledge about himself as an alcoholic, yet all reasons for not drinking were easily pushed aside in favor of the foolish idea that he could take whiskey if only he mixed it with milk. And again, White Russians and Kahlua are things. There's like a lot of alcohol with milk mixtures that happen, but I always thought that was weird, and I was judging him, which rude of me to judge already. Whatever the precise definition of the word may be, we call this plain insanity. That is a synonym for the mental obsession. It is insane to go back to the first drink, despite all the knowledge we have that it is destroying my life. It says, how can such a lack of proportion of the ability to think straight be called anything else? Again, another synonym for the mental obsession. And again, the mental obsession is the thought that I have when I am sober that takes me back to the first drink. And it is this lack of proportion of the ability to think straight. So it's like everything's distorted and exaggerated. And I cannot see reality as it really is. What word? You got to spell that word again. I don't know that word. What does cinnamon mean? I'm like, what? I don't know that one. Ask me again. Synonym. Thank you. I'm so bad. You guys, this is why we can't rely on my reasoning. We need a higher power, because I couldn't get there. A synonym, absolutely, and that is a beautiful question. A synonym is a word that means the same thing as another word. So a synonym for the mental obsession is all the words or the descriptions that we're looking for in this book for the mental obsession. Thanks for the teamwork on that, guys. I so appreciate it. Go team. Some of you are like, we're not here for the sports. You don't have to be a sports fan. You can still get sober. Go sports. Alrighty. So that's what we're talking about. How can such a lack of proportion of the ability to think straight be called anything else? I cannot see reality for what it is. See, when I am as sober as I am today, but my illness is untreated, I think a drink will solve my problems, despite the fact that knowing that it has caused most of them. Do you know what I'm saying? That is a lack of proportion of the ability to think straight. Now, this next paragraph, I have come to find to be more and more important as time has gone on. Like this whole paragraph, I get jazzercised about it. You don't have to get jazzercised, but I'm going to share some stuff on the screen, and I think I got to move some stuff. I got some props. Oh man, we're gonna have a little adventure with this next paragraph. I'm so sorry. Vivian will be back next week to rein me in. So it says, you may think this is an extreme case. Other than the milk part of it, does it sound extreme to any of us? Not really. And some of you probably put some alcohol in some weirder things than milk. Yeah. Eileen pointed out I am unsupervised, which is not great. All right. So to us, it is not far-fetched, for this kind of thinking has been characteristic of every single one of us. Not this type of drinking, the thought that brings me back to the first drink, that I have relapsed. That has been characteristic of all of us who have alcoholism. We have sometimes reflected more than Jim did upon the consequences. We might have had a little bit more of a pause. And it says, but there was always the curious mental phenomenon that parallel with our sound reasoning. There inevitably ran some insanely trivial excuse for taking the first drink. Our sound reasoning failed to hold us in check. The insane idea won out. The next day we could ask ourselves in all earnestness and sincerity how it could have happened. And so what we're talking about at this paragraph is this idea that we have two thoughts that are running a race. Now, this is the first metaphor that I know, Eileen's like just shenanigans. Has anyone here ever seen the movie Tron? Anyone seen the movie Tron? No? Me neither, by the way. But it's the first point of reference that I always make. So the movie Tron, in the movie, they've got these like two little like motorcycles. And so I made this little visual. And so we got these two motorcycles that are running this race. And the first motorcycle that I have is my sound reasoning. And that is my logic. That is my reason. That is I have to stay sober. That is I need to stay sober. That is I want to stay sober. And as soon as I put the bottle down, this race begins. And my sound reasoning, my willpower, my self-knowledge, my desire, my want to stay sober, it is racing this little red motorcycle. And this is only good for people who've seen the movie Tron, or if you haven't seen it and you're just like me and a bit of a weirdo, good for me too. But that red motorcycle is the mental obsession. And it is like these two motorcycles are running a race. Now they're running in parallel. And what it is saying is that it is not if the insane idea wins. It is about when the insane idea wins. So what we're saying is as soon as I put down the bottle, this race begins. And that sound reasoning might, and I'll do another description of it with, I got some props. You can tell I was like, oh, we're going to be doing this one today. My bad. I forgot to get my props within arm's reach. But we got that insane idea. And if the sound reasoning has a head start, that insane idea is always going to come up behind. It is not a matter of if I drink again, but when. And so I'm going to stop the share. And goodness gracious, this is one of my weirder ones. Vivian will be back next week. And so I got these little trains. So imagine the little whale train. Listen, I didn't get the trains for the example. I had the trains and I have the example, and that's how they've. So imagine this little whale train is, just so you can see it, black and white. It's this little whale train, and it is my sane thinking. I don't want to drink. I need to stay sober. And imagine I burn my life to the ground badly. And I'm in so much pain and I'm in so much hopelessness. And it's like, Paige, I'm willing to do anything. And so that in this race, the little whale train gets a head start. But what it's up again is the sleepy time train, which is the mental obsession. I am so sorry for those that are only listening to the recording because it's like, what now? I know. And so, yeah, that'll be the subway for Eileen. And so what happens is I say, I don't want to drink again. And a race begins. And that's the thing, is if I've ever been in AA and I heard people say, it's not a race, man, that's not true. It is a race. I'm not racing you. I'm racing the inevitability of that first drink. So if I burn it to the ground, this little train might have a couple kilometer head start, miles, we're in the States, my bad. A couple miles head start, but it's only a matter of when. You see, this one, it's like a little race car bed, and this is the race car. You know what I mean? It is always going to win. And the only hope that I have is to stop the race. And I'll just do one more little screen share. I was messing around with some, making some visuals with it. And this is a beautiful example. Another just visual, because this metaphor, page 37, second paragraph, is a beautiful metaphor. And it's like in this picture, we've got this, it's this personification of self-will and self-knowledge, losing a race to the personification of the mental obsession. And self-will and self-knowledge is the woman, and she is going and she's doing her best, but she is no match for the mental obsession. It doesn't matter how far a head start I get, and if I burn it to the ground, man, I might have a big head start. But that mental obsession is always, always going to come out in front. It is only a matter of time before I drink again. And when I sort of begin to see this, when this sort of metaphor begins to like click for me, it tells me I've got to move, and I've got to get to business. I've got to get to work, and I've got to get to work quickly. I don't have time to wait. So I'll stop the share. And I'll throw that stuff when I do the recording. I'll throw that stuff in the WhatsApp chat as well. So if anyone wants the visual aids, I'll put them in the WhatsApp. I put the link to the WhatsApp as well as the recording for this big book study in the WhatsApp. So it says, and that idea, like, man, when we've lost the race, when the mental obsession has won, it really is the next day. It's like, how could that have happened? If you know what it's like to come to the morning after, absolutely beaten and baffled and broken, and it's like, how did that happen? And it is important to understand what happened was inevitable. Inevitable. That's the mental obsession. I will drink again. But for a spiritual awakening, a spiritual experience, I will drink again. And it says, in some circumstances, we've gone out deliberately to get drunk. Anyone here ever done that? A case of the F-its, right? Yeah, F it, F you, F my sponsor, F the steps, F it. I'm going to burn this to the ground. I'm going to hurt me, and that'll hurt you, you know? We have gone out deliberately to get drunk, feeling ourselves justified by nervousness, anger, worry, depression, jealousy, or the like. And what this mental obsession looks like, or how this mental obsession presents itself, is if you're feeling the way that I was feeling, you'd have to get drunk too. If you're going through what I was going through, you'd have to get drunk too. Man, it's not fair. If you had the life that I had, you'd have to get drunk too. That mental obsession. And it says, but even in this type of beginning, we are obliged to admit that our justification for a spree was insanely insufficient in the light of what always happened. And an insanely insufficient justification for a spree sounds like the mental obsession to me. Because what happened, what was the light of what always happened? What always happened is, man, it got bad. I did things I didn't want to do. I crossed lines I didn't want to cross. Do you know what I mean? I betrayed trust I didn't want to betray. And I did it again. And so it says we now see that when we begin to drink deliberately, F you, I'm getting drunk, instead of casually, there was little serious or effective thought during the period of premeditation of what the terrific consequences might be. So we weren't thinking through the consequences. As an alcoholic, I cannot play the tape to the end. It'll work until it won't. Do you know what I mean? I might be able to do it for a little bit, but man, when the obsession is on me, it is not a solution. I cannot think of the consequences. I can't play the tape to the end. I can't remember my last drink. I can't do it. And when it says the terrific consequences, we're not talking about, oh boy, that's terrific. We're talking about the scope. the consequences, which are terrific, like huge. A better way to say, or not better, but a more modern way of saying is horrific consequences might be. And keep in mind, horrific consequences might get my little whale train out in the front. It might get my whale train a head start. But that sleepy time train of the mental obsession is coming. I also have a random purple pickup truck. I don't know where that came from, but I got it. I'm also missing a green train. I don't know where that went. Just lost my marbles and my trains. All right. So it says our behavior. Now, this is often everybody's favorite metaphor in the big book. But let's see if we can find ourselves in this metaphor. Our behavior is as absurd and incomprehensible. Like, it's as out there and ununderstandable. It's like it makes no sense with respect to the first drink, because that's what we're focusing on. My real problem is not my physical allergy. My real problem is that despite my physical allergy, I go back to it. So my real problem is the obsession of the mind. So our behavior is as absurd and incomprehensible with respect to the first drink as that of an individual with a passion, say, for jaywalking. And jaywalking is, it's a thing where you cross the street, not at the light and not at the crosswalk, where you're just running into traffic. And I have had people tell me to go play in traffic before, so not lately. Maybe lately. Maybe when I'm on my little train tangent, people are thinking it, you know? Alrighty. And it says he gets a thrill out of skipping in front of fast-moving vehicles. And so what that looks like to me is, if we go back to the cycle, that looks like my sense of ease and comfort. And we see that, that's moved down a little, let me move it up. That sense of ease and comfort. That's what I'm after, right? I get that, like it's a thrill, you know, skipping in front of fast-moving vehicles. It says he enjoys himself for a few years, in spite of friendly warnings. Up to this point, you would label him as a foolish chap having queer ideas of fun. So you could be like, this is a guy's a bit of a weirdo and he's doing some weird things, but as long as he's not harming anybody, no worries. Luck then deserts him, and he is slightly injured several times in succession. Have we had that experience where we have been slightly injured? Now, that injury doesn't necessarily need to be physical, but have I had that physical injury? But have I been slightly injured in terms of financially, slightly injured in terms of friends, romance? Do you know what I mean? Like losing dignity and position and respect. Have I been injured in that way? It said you would expect him, if he were normal, to cut it out. Were there times in my life, if I did not have alcoholism, I mean, it would have made sense for me to stop drinking and be done. And it says, presently he is hit again. And this time has a fractured skull. And what we're seeing is the consequences are getting more and more and more. Within a week after leaving the hospital, a fast-moving trolley car breaks his arm. He tells you he has decided to stop jaywalking for good. And right there, that is him swearing off. Never again. I am never going to do it again. But in a few weeks, he breaks both legs. So what happened for this jaywalker? He said, I am never going to do it again. And then he got a thought, the mental obsession. This time will be different. Nobody will ever know. Man, if you were going through, don't you know how difficult the holidays are? I have to play in traffic. You know, I have to cross the street, right? That's what that looks like. And then it says, he tells you he's decided to stop jaywalking for good, but in a few weeks he breaks both legs. On through the years, this conduct continues, accompanied by his continual promises to be careful. So he's trying to use some power, exert some power over the physical allergy. I will be careful. Or to keep off the streets altogether, trying to exert some power over the mental obsession. I'm not going to do it again. And we're going to see that that doesn't work. Spoilers. Sorry, I didn't mean to spoil the jaywalker, but spoilers. Finally, he can no longer work. His wife gets a divorce and he is held up to ridicule. Have I ever lost things that were important to me? Have I ever felt that depth of shame based on my inability and to stay stopped? And then it says he tries every no means to get the jaywalking idea out of his head. So every time I try every no means to get this idea out of my head, that is me swearing off. And every time I return to it due to the mental obsession. He shuts himself up in an asylum hoping to mend his ways. A detox, a rehab, a treatment center, a psychiatric ward, a psychiatric facility. That is him swearing off. But the day he comes out, he races in front of a fire engine which breaks his back. Such a man would be crazy, wouldn't he? And is that not our experience? That I've gone through that. And in it we see the progression of the illness. One more paragraph and then I'll stop. You think our illustration is too ridiculous? Not really. You kind of pegged me, and it's rude if a book written or published in 1939 to call me out like that. Rude. But is it? We who have been through the ringer. Now, if you grew up where your parents or maybe your grandparents had a ringer, that would be where they would wash them by hands, and the ringer would like it would wring it so they would get so dry, and been through the ringer. Like if you ever caught your fingers in that, oh boy, that is like, I got empathy pains. You know what I mean? So we have been through that immense pain. Have to admit that if we substituted alcoholism for jaywalking, the illustration would fit us exactly. Have I had these consequences? Have I had these reasons and these needs to stop and not been able to? However intelligent we may have been in other respects, but where alcohol has been involved, we have been strangely insane, the mental obsession. It's strong language, but isn't it true? And that is where we can, we'll stop there, but that's where we get to reflect upon. Is it not true that when it comes to not taking the first drink, man, we are insane? If anything in my life gave me the consequences that alcohol did, would I go back to it? And the chances are absolutely not. But I continue to go back to alcohol, despite the fact that I know it's ruining my life. So I'm going to stop the recording.